thanks for listening to another episode of the Future of Data Security. Today I'm speaking with Paul Knight, VP Information Technology and CISO at Turntide Technologies. Paul, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you're a seasoned technology executives leader with 2 decades of experience across IT, cybersecurity, defense, aerospace. I think I even saw, obviously manufacturing, education. So you have a pretty exhaustive career. I'd be curious to learn how you got into cybersecurity and what keeps this work interesting for you today.
I think let's start with the latter first. I think what keeps it interesting is the fact that the people keep wanting our data. Everyone's those malicious threat actors out there. I think I've always had a bit of a passion for cybersecurity. When I first got into technology 2 decades ago, obviously the landscape was very different. We were still on dial-up modems when I first picked up my first computer. Moved into technology and always had a bit of a flair and a passion for it. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride.
And you pretty much transitioned from more traditional IT infrastructure leadership into cyber, and now you're very much on the OT side. How was that transition for you?
I think most businesses has been a journey to get from integration of traditional infrastructure and IT onto the OT side. Again, some of the high profile compromises that have happened in certainly the last 5 or 6 years have helped boards and IT professionals really focus on what's important for the business. So there's much more discussion around, well, okay, how can my IT team help my product? How can we really integrate this stuff to make sure that we're, secure across the portfolio, not just on the IT side? So it was a natural progression really to pick up that as part of the IT leadership.
Talking about OT security in particular, the general public, they see a lot of breaches in the financial services sector, people losing credit cards, hackers stealing PII. But what happens when a cyber attack can, literally shut down a factory's machine, the heating, stop the floor? What are the main differences and how does it compare?
I mean, somebody losing some money out of their bank account versus critical national infrastructure being closed down from some sort of cyber threat or breach. I think, asking the board from some of the recent massive high profile attacks, it affects different people in different ways. I think the far reaching of some of the cyber attacks, there's so many more implications down the supply chain, customer chain. There's just these high profile breaches now just affect so many different people along the way. And I think that's, it's more recognized now. It's more understood. So, gone are the days where it's just a few quid out of your bank account. Nowadays, it can literally shut down. It can shut down nations in the worst scenario, but it can certainly shut down significant parts of industry.
And speaking about more the factory environment, the high-tech manufacturing, what are some of the key nightmare scenarios, if you will, that, obviously not at your company, but that you've seen in the sector?
Recently in a large scale manufacturing, one in particular, these attacks have the ability to literally stop a company. In recent years, we've seen a number of large companies that have been around for, tens and tens of years actually cease trading in the worst scenarios. In the best scenario, you're down for a couple of days. It's certain parts, but in the worst case scenarios, some of these larger scale attacks, especially on the shop floor, when you've got to get product out the door to customers, not being able to manufacture in the manufacturing industry is critical. It's actually, it's life changing.
I heard of a company right here in Toronto that was doing advanced manufacturing, and they had decades of CNC instructions and a catalog of product. They had a ransomware, and all these instructions were deleted. And it became all of a sudden a massive problem because they didn't have the backups, or the hackers also got to the backup. What's your thoughts on ways to prevent these types of risks? And, you know, maybe you could give us an overview of what's a modern security stack look like in the manufacturing space.
Yeah, and Still today, I visit many manufacturing sites, and still today, there's technology in some of those sites that is just decades old, and it can't be changed. When you're manufacturing a product that has some sort of regulatory oversight on it, it requires you not to change the technology that's feeding that particular product, that particular line. So as that line becomes older, you've still got to keep it going. So we're still plagued across manufacturing. Some of the more kind of technology advanced sites have brand new technology. They've got brand new systems, and it's great. But there's a lot of manufacturing out there that still use these CNC machines, these old PLCs that just can't be changed. People that programmed them left decades ago, and they've just kept going and going and going. The key thing for me has always been about identification. Knowing what your assets are, how your flows, certainly in manufacturing, how that flows through the shop floor, how that flows through the factory, and really getting an insight into what's out on that shop floor. You know, there are companies out there with Windows XP still running on the shop floor. How do you put a compensating control around that? I think for me, we've introduced a lot of zero trust across our infrastructure. It's not just a case of going back to the manufacturer. I mean, some of these companies no longer exist. You go back to the manufacturer and can I upgrade this? Oh, yes, of course. You can buy our next model of machine, which is, $6 million. It takes a lot of capital investment. So I think as a CISO, and not just a technologist, but as a CISO, you've got to look at your landscape, understand your landscape, work closely with your IT department, and really look at that zero trust model. It's no longer acceptable to just have this shop floor, which is an open field day for a lot of hackers and threat actors. You've got to understand the technology and then put compensating controls around it. But it's challenging. It is very, very challenging.
Do you think that part of the problem is, a lot of the PLC manufacturers were legacy, and for a time they were really focused on high quality PLCs, getting the cost down, getting the actual factory features, up there. And today they're basically catching up. And as you said, a lot of obsolete models that were part of that OG lineup didn't have security at all as a core concern. Is that a big issue you're seeing? And is there improvement?
Yeah, and I think up until, certainly for Europe, until 2027, when the CRA comes in, the Cyber Resiliency Act, people are still making stuff that isn't secure first. Stuff is still being produced today. A lot of IoT devices, it just isn't, because it simply isn't worth putting lots of security into it. It's a cheap product. You buy 12 of them for $10 and put them out to monitor all sorts of data points. So they're not manufactured necessarily with the security in there. That will change. I think over the next, certainly we're starting to see some of it, but over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see a significant, almost a paradigm shift in a lot of these manufacturers.
And for myself and some of our audience that are probably more like on the banking, insurance, pharmacy side, I think we're all curious to understand what goes on today in a modern factory. Like, are all the PLCs connected to the cloud so you can sort of centrally monitor the whole operation? Is it air gap network because it's more secure? What are you seeing typically in the factory floors today?
I think a lot of manufacturing sites are playing catch up. They're moving from that traditional, we've got everything on a network and it's connected by switches, and we might have some virtual segregation in there, to okay, well, how do we secure all this? You might have 12, 15, 18 different models of PLC and control systems and CNC and welding machines, and depending on what you do. I think the dream is to have everything talking together. And certainly there's a lot of really cool software out there. AI is obviously making that a lot easier to take that data and consolidate that data. Getting it connected for the data consolidation is the first piece. And then how do you secure that? I think that's the piece that still today is, we're still playing catch up, getting this stuff connected to pull all the data off it. And then the security is constantly kind of catching up.
We're going to talk about AI in a moment, but I was curious, maybe as a thought experiment, if we were to send you in a factory, any given factory, what would be sort of the top things that coming on the floor you'd be looking at to assess the security of the operation?
I think that's a great question. Actually, it's a really great question. Where would I start? I mean, it would really depend on the nature of the business. I think you've got to start literally with your your data, the nature of the business, the regulation, the regulatory stuff. What are the key things that potentially threat actors might be after? What do they want? If somebody was going to come a ransomware and data extract here, what would they be looking for and what would they be looking to take? As I said previously, identifying those key assets out across that and then taking it piece by piece and kind of looking from the internet right the way through. Okay, how can I get to this system? What's next? Yeah, big job.
So very much a crown jewel approach to see what are people after. What would you say, just for the audience's visibility, are some of the typical crown jewel in a manufacturing operation? We talked about, CNC instructions. Can you name a few other things that might be different from the banking, the financial services, public sector, etc.?
I think the biggest one is just stopping production operations. Stopping manufacturing operations. If you can stop production by ransomware machines, straight away that company is going to be sort of sitting up and talking to you. From a data perspective, obviously some of the more advanced aerospace defense, some of the espionage stuff, they're going to be looking at drawings, intellectual property. That's some big business. And then from a raw manufacturing perspective, it is your 3D, your design, your CAD. Those are the crown jewels, and that is the stuff that's really important to potential threat actors.
Absolutely. Talking about AI, what I've seen, and I talked to many guests, is a lot of enterprises today are excited about AI. It's going to be transformative for their business, but they seem to have trouble moving from AI pilots to full scale deployments. Often it's because there's going to be data loss in prompts and file uploads, unfettered continuous access of an AI system to files, OneDrive, SharePoint. It's almost the case now where an employee can share everything they have access to in one click. And people are waking up to the fact, okay, the AI providers have massively downplayed the security risk because they need to sell models, but safe adoption is paramount. So I'm curious to hear you on that. What are you seeing for key use cases for generative AI in the manufacturing high tech space, and how is it transforming the threat landscape?
I read an article just today that one of the major AI producers have said, yes, we were aware, as we mature these LLMs and we bring out the next GPT models, it's going to massively increase the attack vector and the threat landscape. As a company that's probably in the same situation, that we've done a lot of piloting with AI. Number one is trust. It's the first and foremost thing that we're coming up against is trust. A lot of senior people on board, CFOs, CEOs, are reading articles and going, "Well, where's all our data going?" And I don't think anyone out there, any of the big AI providers, really have that trust because of the levels of access that most of the AIs need to be, really useful and provide that data feedback real time. They need high levels of access to your data in the first place. And then you're back to well, do we really want to put our crown jewels on somebody else's server and let them, provide us that real time feedback? So the first thing for me is absolutely trust. From a manufacturing space, it is transforming the way that we operate in terms of our ability to consume the data that comes back off the shop floor. There's a lot of software out there historically that would take all these data points, put it into, nice graphs, pretty dashboards, that sort of stuff. AI it's revolutionizing that because it's taking all of those data points and hundreds of millions of data points from other information and sources, and it's able to provide you real-time feedback. So you're getting much cleaner data back. Obviously, I say to people, when we're using AI, when I train at work or speak to people at work, you treat it like an executive assistant, give it clear instructions, and you trust it like an intern. You double check everything. You make sure everything's, double checked before you use that data. So, and that comes back again to my first point is trust. We just don't quite trust AI just yet.
It's very interesting. I saw some reports here in Canada, the usual suspects in the big four Some of them have been cut with submitting big reports, very expensive studies to a government client, as an example. And then the references are fake, they don't even exist. Turns out the whole thing was done pretty much with an AI. And I think people are starting to see these emerging issues, right, of trust, because now, hey, we trust you, the big four, but now you're using these tools and it's not even validated. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting and also very dangerous. Certainly anyone that works in consulting now, 8 months ago, we were hearing that, the big consulting firms were done. Their time was limited because of AI, and all it takes is a couple of big, news articles like this that an experienced consultant has. And I read stuff on some of the social sites as well, and you just think straight away that's AI. Somebody's just AI that the line hyphens in the words. Key example.
We did a couple interviews, where we think pretty much with a high degree of certainty some of the candidates are cheating with real time AI assistance. Because they'll, like, if you'll ask them a question about their family, what are you doing with your kids? They'll be talking in a different way. Then you ask a more technical question and they lock into the screen and then they produce a very elaborate, elegant, multi-pronged answer that really nobody really speaks like that, right? So that's so interesting. Some of the byproducts we're observing with this AI super cycle.
It's going to get better. It's going to get better and faster. It's going to be harder and harder. There's a company recently come out of stealth from an Israeli startup, and they have essentially a bot that you would invite into a call like this to check that it's not AI driven. I've been on interviews myself where I was absolutely certain that there was an AI real time going on. Oh, can I come back to that question? And then you come back to it 5 minutes later, and it's textbook answer. It's going to be a real problem.
How do you know I'm not an AI? I could be an AI. Maybe I sent my AI avatar to conduct this interview.
Yeah, are we even real? Are we even should we check?
No, that's great. I'm curious, back to OT and the world of high-tech manufacturing. How big of a challenge is unstructured data? Files at rest, files in circulation versus structured data, which we could see more as database information, maybe even information in legacy systems. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and it comes back to my previous point with how AI is helping us. There's so much software out there now that people seem to go to. So, rather than trying to solve a problem now, a lot of users will always look for a software solution to solve that problem. It doesn't necessarily need that. So, in certainly in manufacturing, you end up with a lot of legacy. This is how we've done it previously. This is how we're doing it now, and each of those processes across your shop floor, your workspace will produce data. Some of it will be flat files, some of it will be database, some unstructured, restructured. So you've got all of these data points all over different places, locally on machines, some stored in servers. How do you bring it then all back to one central location? And it is a real problem. Some of the trials that we've done recently is around having AI take all of that unstructured data and turn it into something that is structured that can then be used. And it's stuff that necessarily an analyst may miss.
That's a very interesting point, and I'm curious if you could share some examples of use cases or trials where AI has really delivered value, and maybe the opposite, where it fell completely flat on its face and it's not as advertised.
A recent trial that we did, we were looking at how we can speed up our NDA process. NDA takes a lot of legal time, so we thought, okay, well, let's see if we can build something that our sales teams can use when NDAs are in flight. So we gave it the parameters. We spent time training the model and the bot, but it just doesn't cut it. It doesn't actually cut it. It produces an NDA, but then somebody has to go back and read it, and we just couldn't get it to consistently. And I think consistency is the key thing here. It comes back to that trust thing. We just couldn't trust that consistently it could deliver that NDA. There's always an element of lack of trust there. So it was fun, but we realized quite quickly that it wasn't gonna come to fruition and provide value.
Actually, for what it's worth, we tried the same project and we reached similar problems. And it's back to trust. You actually need to trust those systems 100%. It's not 80%, it's 100, right?
Yeah, yeah, and we're not quite there. But on the flip side of that, we generate, with embedded firmware, we generate a lot of log data, an awful amount of log data when we're running through test scripts and test systems. Previously, we had not 100% manual, but they were using a lot of Python scripts to look through logs, looking for keywords, triggers, that sort of stuff. AI has absolutely changed functionally how quickly we can consume those testing. So from a testing use case perspective, we were able to speed up our tests, and we saw 300 or 400% increase in how quickly we could run through tests. We were able to identify real time in log files much quicker than waiting until Monday, somebody to come in, have a look through, see what failed, and go from there. We were able to actually take action quickly. So two very different use cases. I think from a data analytics perspective, being able to pick things out real time patterns, AI is absolutely, it's incredible. It does a great job. From a more of a quantitative perspective, it's not so good.
And for what it's worth, we had a similar conclusion on tests, very useful. And I was reading various publications from Gartner, Forrester. They all seem to put the use case of AI testing automation in the top right quadrant. And I hear a lot of people having success with that. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and it's certainly from a personal perspective, it saves me, you know, hours each week for sure. Looking at things if I have to analyze files or analyze data. We have everything on premise from a security perspective, but it actually saved me hours with the stuff.
How do you see Gen AI transforming security operations, next year, over the next 2 years? What's the next bound? What's the next use case you feel is going to be game changing?
I think we're still in the sprinkling stage, what I call the sprinkling stage. Suddenly everyone popped up and went, "We do AI," and they've sprinkled a little bit of AI into their platform, or they might have bought a product, or they might be doing some log analysis. We're still in that Gen 1 AI, and I don't think anyone that I've met so far has broken through into that. That's incredible. We're still waiting for that kind of, the blockbusters to Netflix, kind of technology shift. From a security perspective, sadly, the defensive operations will drive the offensive operations from security. So we will start to see threat actors, and we have been using threat actors using AI more and more and more in delivery mechanisms. As the models increase, I was an interview with Sam Altman probably a few months ago now, and he was asked, what is GPT-10 going to look like? And he's talking about it designing drugs. You put the molecules in, it designs the drug, tells you to go off and synthesize this, that. And I think we're going to see the same within the security landscape. Our challenge is going to be, can we provide enough processing power to run the detection mechanisms and keep up with the threats that are being generated through AI? Are we going to end up in an AI war? Two AIs fighting each other over entry through a firewall.
An AI peacock fight.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, with security operations just sitting there watching.
Exactly. I was curious if you were thinking about your career and speaking to maybe a younger professionals starting in the cybersecurity, OT, high tech manufacturing. What would be some key pieces of wisdom or advice you could share?
I think find somebody that has been doing this for a long time, and get some mentoring. That's the key thing. I have a couple of students I mentor at the moment, and I think while it's great, the university, the degrees, the training that's out there is incredible. Raw experience is absolutely vital. So if you can get a mentor, get some internships, get some work experience, go and see what it's actually like. Because going into cybersecurity is a big, big, big sector. There's many, many different pathways through cybersecurity. So understanding what it is you want to do, and just being patient. Don't jump over the foundations. You know, People often say, how can I be a red team? How can I be a hacker? I want to learn to hack. You've got to understand the foundations and the principles first. So spending time in a service desk role, in a service delivery role, so you can understand how IT operates, I think is really, really key as well.
You brought up an interesting point. I read another Gartner article, and it spoke to the cognitive degradation with over-reliance on the AI system. Because I think a lot of people, in our generation would have a more classical training pre-AI, and we would think about resolving a problem. Then once we have a plan, we would use AI to accelerate formalizing, formatting, documenting the plan. But a lot of people now are kind of relinquishing holistically the thinking to the machine and saying, hey, do the plan for me. And that's going to lead to cognitive atrophy. And I think it'll be a big challenge for young people, especially in highly technical fields, when they have ready access to that sort of a magical box, right, that can do the thinking for you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think social media may have beaten AI to the post on that one in the reduction of cognitive thinking. I alternate between two thoughts of process. Yes, absolutely. I use AI most days, but I know what the answer should be. I know what the answer is going to be. It's just shortcutting me actually sitting there with a spreadsheet and doing the analysis work and everything else. So we have a real danger. I think the reduction of cognitive thinking is one thing, but the trust element is still the key thing for me. If you've got 10 people straight after university just using AI, that's going to be a problem because we're then putting all of our trust into that AI, and it's going to reduce that cognitive thinking. I think it's going to be a challenge. Then the second chain of thought I go to is, well, actually, we're going to need people to run these models. So it's a different set of tech. We're never going to replace humans. I think we've proven that already. And there's always going to have to be a human to load the model, feed the model, query the model, and then consume the output. But yeah, I think it's something to definitely watch in terms of the space for sure.
Very insightful. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Before we wrap up, Paul, if people want to follow along with your work online, what's the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, if people want to follow, I release a few papers every now and again, non-AI generated. They are my own thought process, and I do double check the references.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a really fun conversation. Thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts. Let's keep in touch and see you soon.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.